Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us here for this session on command and control for distributed maritime operations. My name is Eric Thompson. I'm from the Center for Naval Analyses, and it's my pleasure to convene this session and to be the MC for this part of the conversation. And I'd like to thank everybody for making their way into this room today. I know there's some broad geography across the convention center, so thanks for navigating your way here. I appreciate that. Thanks to the Navy League for bringing us together and for inviting the panelists and for me to come along and be part of this conversation. And to L3, who is the sponsor for this particular panel. And mostly, thanks to the panelists for taking time out of their busy days to give us perspectives and points of view on this important topic that is being wrestled with across all of the services, particularly all the maritime services, in partnership with the Joint Force, in partnership with industry, and in partnership with our partners and allies as well. If you read the description of this session, it gave you this impression that we're talking about the Navy's component of JADC2. I'm going to tell you, we're going to have a broader conversation about that. It's going to be maritime dimensions. It's going to be the focus on how do we actually do command and control for distributed operations. It's going to be part technical, but it's going to be part operational and part informed by the full service careers of these folks that we have up here, not just their current remit and responsibilities, because command and control is something that is critical at every level of command, in every dimension of the maritime force and the joint force. So I'm going to ask the panelists to draw from their broader experience, but we will make sure that you have the opportunity to hear from them on where they do fit into this puzzle today and what their organizations are doing to try to make sure that each of the services and the joint force writ large has the capabilities to command and control forces for widely distributed maritime operations. The way I'm going to start this is I'm going to ask each of these panelists to give you a little insight into what they do and how they do it. I'm not going to read biographies. Those are all available to you online. These people have a long experience, background, and reputation, and are highly Googleable. I know this for a fact. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of them to, first of all, tell us about a day in your life. How do you expend your time, energy, and bandwidth? How do you fit into the broader conversation within your service? And also, can you tell me about what are the primary efforts of your organization to advance command and control for distributed maritime operations? So let me just start with General Glavey first. Tell us about a day in your life, and tell us what your organization is trying to accomplish in this area.
Eric, thank you, and appreciate it. Thanks to the Navy League for doing this every year. No one does it better, so appreciative. All the industry partners. Obviously, without you, not much of what we're going to talk about is possible. So thanks again. So I'm the Deputy Commandant for Information. What the hell's that? The 37th Commandant, General Neller, put it together. And essentially, it's about what we're going to talk about today. So it's taking many of those warfighting functions that didn't sit as close to the Commandant from an organized, trained, and equipped standpoint as it needed to be. So what am I talking about? Intelligence, C4, cyber, influence operations being the primary capabilities. We did likewise at our Marine Expeditionary Forces at the MEF level, at our operational construct, by developing the MEF information groups. So again, converging capabilities like the Communications Battalion, Intelligence Battalion, Signals Intelligence Battalion, our Air Naval Gunfire Liaison companies, Anglico, our Comstrat companies, all our PAO, our Defensive Cyberspace Operations, and ultimately PsyOps company together in a single unit with a singular commander, executing unity of command. Set on top of that, an information command center, and there the MEF commander can task an operational commander to get stuff done. And as we look at force design, we're in year 4 of force design. So what do I do day in the life? I listen very closely to our Commandant and determine, to the best of my ability, how are we going to organize and train, equip the Marine Corps to execute the vision of force design. So year 4, set and sustain the stand-in force. We have crossed the Rubicon. We've made the hard decisions about divestment. Not easy, by the way. We're continuing to experiment. We're continuing our campaign of learning, which sets us up for where we're at right now. And that's the ability to maneuver to godforsaken places and provide capabilities the joint force needed. And wouldn't you believe a lot of that has to deal with what I do and how I organize, train, and equip on behalf of the Commandant. So the ability to fuse, correlate information to generate outcomes. As a Marine, right, it's all about combined arms, that full integration of arms in order to create a dilemma for our adversary. But at the end of the day, that's the value proposition we want to provide to the Joint Force Commander. A lot of positive momentum here. Recently, we got permission from Japanese government, thanks to Secretary of Defense, to stand up our 12th Marine Littoral Regiment in Okinawa, Japan. Critical. Proximity matters. Additionally, our 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment now is about to go to IOC here in the fall. So momentum is on our side, and we're pushing forward. And these capabilities we're bringing to bear truly about sense, making sense, and ultimately acting. And whether it's fires from an organic marine capability or better yet from a joint force capability, we do this on behalf of the fleet commander. We do this in a maritime sense as far as sea control is as required by that fleet commander. So I will tell you, it's exciting to watch this happen, to watch the modernization of our force, and combine that with the innovation, experimentation that's going on. Sometimes causes dilemmas, putting all that together, but I'll tell you, it's a pleasant dilemma on where we're at right now. So again, thank you for having me, and look forward to the questions.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. And Admiral Pete Gauthier is the Director of Operations Deputy Commandant for the Coast Guard. Doesn't come at this from the same sort of background, but a lifelong operational career. So I'm going to ask you a slight variation on that question. First of all, we do want to hear what a day in the life is like for the Deputy Commandant for Operations. But also, with your experience in leading the operational sort of dimensions and thinking for perhaps one of the most operational maritime forces in the world, the U.S. Coast Guard, on a day-to-day basis, what do you think are the most important dimensions of command and control for widely distributed forces for distributed maritime operations? And can you share that with us?
Yes, certainly. Thanks very much, Eric, also for leading this panel here. And it's great to be part of the biggest and best sea air space in history here with this terrific crowd. And just listening to General Glavy's comments and knowing that the Marines conduct information operations par excellence, I just reflect that they brought Chesty, their mascot, which is just a brilliant stroke of information operations here. I'm glad that you all made it past that distraction to be listening to this panel today. But so, Deputy Commandant for Operations, what do we do? Well, I think maybe the easiest translation I can provide to you all is essentially, I'm the equivalent of the N2, N3, N5, N7, plus CG cyber forces. And we've got a foot in the military Title 10 DOD camp, and we've got a foot in the DHS, domestic interagency camp, and sort of everything in between. So a day in the life, and I would think that a lot of you in the audience have probably served in the Pentagon or in the National Capital Region. So a day in the life is always a tug of war between immediacy and fighting fires within the National Capital Region, and then that dynamic tension with the longer term and what we're trying to do to build the most capable Coast Guard forces that we can in the future. So, you know, on any given day, it might be engaging in a cyber issue, since cyber operations are under the Deputy Commandant for Operations. It might be building policies with DHS and with the White House in order to deter and prevent a mass migration by sea, which we are contending with a historic flow of migrants by sea currently. And then dealing with those day-to-day sorts of things. But I think what the most important thing that the great men and women in the Coast Guard do in the DCO enterprise is day in, day out, we build the strategy and the policy and the future capabilities of the United States Coast Guard looking 20 to 30 years out, so we can be prepared for this rapidly changing environment that we continue to contend with on any given basis. So with that, on the Title 10, we are a part of the Joint Force. we every day look to do our part to advance our roles in the national military strategy, national defense strategy side of things, very much with an interoperability mindset with the United States Navy and the United States Marine Corps within the Tri-Service Maritime Strategy Framework. But then on the other hand, we are a DHS agency. We have Title 14, disaster response, emergency response, law enforcement, and other authorities that we work through and with DHS on to do the Secretary's priorities for things like defending ourselves against transnational criminal organizations, drugs, terrorism, securing our borders, advancing our cybersecurity, and particularly in the maritime transportation system, and building preparedness and responding to natural disasters. So it's kind of the everything bagel, Eric.
Excellent, great, thank you so much. And Admiral Small, you have a day job as the Commander of Naval Information Warfare Systems Command, but you also have additional charge from the CNO to solve some hard problems. Can you tell us what a day in your life looks like, and what do you think are the most challenging and important dimensions of command and control for distributed maritime operations?
Sure. So you kind of hit on it there. It is a challenge for command and control and distributed maritime operations. Is it gone? Very good. Yeah, so on the one hat, I am the commander of NAVWAR, Naval Information Warfare Systems Command, and in that hat, we have, first off, 11,000 brilliant people working in a couple of Navy labs, as well as out here at the NAVWAR Space Field Activity that, bring the science and engineering backbone to everything that we do in command and control, communications, et cetera, for the Navy and Marine Corps. So that, and we provide, technical authority, certainly have a lot of cyber authorities, things like that, all under that NAVWAR hat. And then as the direct reporting program manager for Project Overmatch, we have a sort of a cross-Navy team that's working on system of systems, rapid integration and fielding of a new naval operational architecture, very tightly integrated with the Marine Corps Joint Force to deliver on this naval operational architecture. And the whole purpose is to enhance distributed maritime operations. And talking to the sort of the broader theme of this, it really is about how do naval forces provide capability to the Joint Force. It is through this concept of distributed maritime operations. And that brings some key challenges when it comes to how do you see two forces that could be distributed over great distances. Naval forces, Marine littoral regiments, all these different groups that are, arrayed across a, fairly contested environment that's, sort of new to us as we sort of pivot our operations toward that part of the world. So that's basically it, is delivering on that operational architecture to enhance distributed maritime operations, coupled with the NAVWAR work is what we do to deliver on that operational architecture.
Great, thanks. And Dr. Al-Karim from Northrop Grumman, bringing an industry perspective, but also a long history of working in a partnership with the Defense Department across the board. Can you tell us about your organization's sort of main efforts to provide operational command and control capabilities to joint forces?
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, Eric.
And we'd love to hear about a day in your life as well.
Well, you mentioned the highly Googleable, but I'll try to, that might be the first thing that I check. Thank you for running this panel, and glad to be part of this esteemed group, and thanks to the Navy League. My job jar is about connecting weapon systems from seabed to space in ways that are hopefully open, resilient, scalable, and affordable. That includes things that Northrop Grumman builds, like E2, Triton, maritime targeting cells, CWIP, Gator radars, but it also includes things that our industrial partners build. I think we're kind of well beyond the age of proprietary networks, and the idea of having to bring not just a whole of company solution to a whole of government problem, but a whole of industry solution to a whole of government problem that's the warfighting imperative we face, and not just in the US, but also for our coalition partners as well. I think the affordability dimension consumes a lot of time, both as we think about the cost, the literal financial cost, but then also how much time can we afford? Do we need to field a 12-month solution or a 60-month solution? And how do we build that graceful arc from the things that we need to do today but to try to build the warfighting network that we need? Are there things that we can do now that are bets of no regret that put us on that arc to fielding the network that we know we want in the future? And ultimately, why are we connecting? It's in order to support the warfighter and their mission requirements. As we look at DMO, EABO, and Loki, are the connections that we're making supportive of those emerging warfighting concepts? My division is focused on connectivity, processing, intelligence in order to deliver decision advantage to the warfighter. A big part of that is in the connectivity portfolio. All of those diagrams that we know and love that have a lot of lightning bolts on them, I'd like to put on my business card, making the lightning bolts real. I think that's a big part of what industry can do to support the folks in uniform on this stage and then elsewhere. I think there's a few different components to that I'm fortunate enough to work on both sides of the equation. One is an architectural component, and that's folks at Northrop Grumman working with mission planners, working with customers, working with warfighters in order to understand mission objectives. Where should the next marginal dollar go? How can we make architectural trades between $1 of radio, $1 of satellite, $1 of weapon data link, and figure out what's the most important thing to work on? That's where systems engineering, modeling, simulation, and analysis, teams that I work with, I think are very important in helping to wade through this decision space. I think the second part of it, you need architects, but you also need plumbers. How are you actually going to solve this problem with radios, gateways, processors, and apertures? I think I'd like to emphasize, I think the literal function of command and control, that's a warfighting function. Our role is helping to contribute to the digital battle network that allows the services to create the C2 construct that they need.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate that. The ground rules for this session is we encourage audience participation and questions. And I have a few questions I am going to ask the panelists, but there is a microphone in the middle of the room. I encourage you to make your way there, and I will stop asking questions from the stage to put a bias on questions from the room. So I really encourage you to come forward with questions for any of the panelists or all of the panelists. But let me just pick up the conversation from a couple of the points that were raised here today. One was, we're trying to create something to support our future warfighting needs. And in trying to create that something, there are some unknown dimensions and there's some known challenges as well. And so I would like to ask, I'll start with Admiral Small on this one. From your perspective, as you think about building out this architecture, what are some of the things that worry you that might not sequence at the same time? Is it the dollars available to make critical investments? Is it technological maturity? Is it the human capital workforce on industry or on the military side? What do you think that looks like, and what are those challenges for really bringing distributed maritime operations command and control together and make it real for warfighting?
So at least for my part of it, in terms of delivering the sort of the architectural components and things like that, I think we've tried to take an approach, not unique to Project Overmatch, but just using an agile and a DevOps framework of start with what you have, right? Start with what technology is maturing or mature. Start with what you have, build incrementally, and move as quickly as you can with that kind of a construct. And that's borrowed from sort of the best of industry. And so that way you pace yourself by what is available. It is a different construct in that as you're delivering smaller pieces of technology, you have to make sure that you bring all of the rest of the dot mil PF if you'll allow me that. But you got to make sure that people are trained, that the sustainment, all that stuff is there, as well as people know how to use it to be able to exercise that command and control mission. So I'd say it's a combination of it's built in, but you got to bring everybody along. That's probably it's definitely a challenge.
General Glaby, if I can ask you from the Marine Corps' perspective, not only are you trying to sort of create this opportunity to have widely distributed forces, but you're also talking about redesigning the force itself And so can you describe sort of the big challenges for making sure that the time phasing and the sequencing of the systems and the investments and the technology and the people and training come together to enable widely distributed operations, particularly within the WES?
Well, I'm going to start with a quote, pretty recent, and see if the audience can guess who this was and where it was. Right now, there are changes, the likes of which we haven't seen for 100 years. Of course, that's the last thing that President Xi said to President Putin on the steps of the Kremlin as they ended their historic summit. They've blunted, they've built, they've globalized. This is real. It is real. So if we don't start with an understanding of the adversary, we're going to be in an awkward place. And I will tell you, force design, the National Defense Strategy, is focused on this discussion, specifically that meeting, if you want to pick an epicenter. So change is really hard. Matter of fact, using my kids' vernacular, change sucks. Helicopter pilot, one each. In aviation, we say change is the mother of all risk. You know, it's dangerous. You want to be good at it. Do something 10,000 times and you get the same thing over and over again. You get pretty good at it. That's not what this is all about. We have to change. There is like no doubt in anybody's mind. And this adversary is moving at a pace, deliberate, eye-opening. The one advantage we have, and the one advantage we have to take full use of, full measure of, C2. Right? No one operates better than the joint force. Parochially, no one operates better than the maritime component. Having done 8 Marine Expeditionary Units in my life, you know, it's an orchestra on those 3 amphibious ships that are out there every day doing what this nation desires. It's special, it's unique. I will tell you, when we get into the semantics of it, it's really, to Admiral Small's point, incremental success over time leads to greatness. You know, trying to eat this whole thing one bite at a time is going to be problematic. I will tell you what else is problematic. Getting immersed in very large ACAT-1 programs that take the life out of you in order to move forward, in order to innovate to the point that Doug discusses. The Marine Corps has taken on really a 2-pronged track. One is modernization, right? And that's the divestment piece we had to do. Not popular, like not popular. That we had to do in order to go do the modernization required, you know, based on this adversary that is real. The other part is the innovation and experimentation. And that has been powerful. The Commandant has deliberately left that up to a lot of our MEFs, our Marine Expeditionary Forces out there, a lot of amazing Marines, you know, in the fleet doing the do. They have really good ideas. And I give a lot of credit to the Commandant to afford those opportunities for truly the MEF commanders have a say in how we're going to press forward. How are we going to get to the incremental success over time? I've seen time and time again software programs that just, you know, they take a requirement, come back 12, 18 months, 24 months later, and it's not it, right? It's wrong. Most time don't work. But whatever we thought we were going to do 24 months ago, especially in this world, in Doug's world, it is not what we need to do right now. So this incremental approach that he describes is truly the way we're going to have to move forward against an adversary that's building. So a lot to discuss. We could probably talk the entire hour here on it, but I'll leave it at that.
Excellent, great. Admiral Gauthier, I'm going to come back to you in just a second with a question sort of on first principles of command and control for widely distributed forces, because you know the Coast Guard lives, as you described, with many masters and many partners, and wonder if you could give us perspectives. But I did say I was going to put a bias on questions from the floor, so before I come back to you with that question, I will take the first question from our microphone.
Thanks a lot. Mike Mann, retired Navy Rear Admiral. I've lived this dream in my career of getting to a point where I think Doug's trying to go with Project Overmatch. But I'm really struggling with this because we're talking about the joint force. How does all this plug in? How does all the effort from the Navy side, Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard side plug into the joint side? Is this a chicken and an egg problem? Who's going first here? And how's that integration going to occur? That's the first question. The second question is, I get it. You don't eat an elephant in one bite. You eat the elephant in small bites, and I totally get it. But how are you measuring your success? What are your measures of effectiveness to know that you're doing better? And I just throw that out to everybody. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks. I appreciate that. Admiral Small, I'll give you the chance to describe how what you're doing, what the Navy's doing, does fit into the joint force, and we'll pick up the conversation from there.
Yeah, I think it's kind of starts with the theme of the panel, right, which is command and control of basically maritime forces. How do maritime forces provide capability to the joint force? It's through distributed maritime. That is the concept of operations for the Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard is distributed maritime operations. Certainly EABO and literal operations in a contested environment. It's all part of it. So each service has, I'll say, different C2 challenges for how you actually, if you make a decision, you got to be able to promulgate it. Just the communications networks, the challenges that you have are different for the different services. We had to talk to submarines, for example, right? So my only point is that the operational architecture that we're developing, that we're fielding, is all about naval power on behalf of the joint force. If you want to talk about the command side of C2, that I think gets to the point that you're getting to is what's joint. It's a joint command structure. So once the command structure is written down, basically, then the architectural elements for the naval forces fold into that overall command structure. You're talking from strategic to tactical level of war, and an architecture that allows that C2 to flow from that joint force commander to the individual unit commander. That's what the project is about. I can't get into any of the specifics. The only thing I can say is that each service has unique needs for how to command and control forces in the environment that we are going to find ourselves in, that we find ourselves in today, is different than the environment that we're coming out of for 20 some odd years. And furthermore, I'll say, for how we plug in technically into JADC2, there is a JADC2 reference architecture that we use to flow through all of our requirements in a model-based engineering construct. If anyone wants to talk model-based engineering, I mean, we can talk about that, but it's all of those technical discussions all flow through that entire modeling effort. But it still comes down to, I don't want to lose sight of the fact, it still comes down to the art of command and control and what it is that we provide architecturally to allow those commanders at all levels to be able to exercise the brilliant C2 that General Glavy just described. It's joint, it's all domain, but it comes down to its command and control, okay?
General Glavy, I'm going to give you the opportunity to also talk about joint integration, but first I'm going to turn to the second part of your question, which is really how do we know that we're doing the right things and making the progress? And rather than starting with the uniform side, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Karim, how do you in industry know that you're doing the right things and making the right sort of progress and contributions?
Sure. Well, I'd like to maybe take one gander at the first part of that question about the integrating disparate networks from across the joint force. I think we don't acquire networks centrally, we don't acquire them as a joint force, and I think the near-term future is a network of networks, and we're going to have to figure out how to bridge that across the joint force. That could be with radios, with a family of platform-agnostic gateways. For example, if you have F-35 sensor data, you should be able to push that to an F-22 that's part of an Air Force network. You should be able to push that same data to a carrier strike group, and having the right radios or gateways or translators to make that battle network possible, I think, is one way to make incremental progress, as the gentlemen on this panel have described. I think you measure by what you've delivered to the warfighter. I think how do you move beyond prototypes and get to IOC and fielded capability? Are requirements being written in different ways, and ultimately is the kit getting out there, and is it being used? I think that's how we think about measuring ourselves. Are you turning that tail from prototype to production and delivery into operational usage?
General Glavy, would you like to talk about joint connections, joint interdependencies, as you think about the future of the Marine Corps' contributions to JADC2 and integration there too?
So I'm a helicopter pilot, one each, and lived in a world where, again, trying to do the interoperability that Admiral Small's really, really hard, painful to do. 5 of the last 7 years, I spend my time up at Fort Meade, a whole new world, very humbling. And I'll tell you that about every 90 days, I have to change all my assumptions, right? Whatever I thought was this is the only way, right? Slap your hand on the table, make a point of it. But you know what? It comes back to bite you because technology is just moving so fast. I'll give you an example. Denied degraded environments, right? It's going to be a tough one, right? And it has driven us hard, and we still need to honor that threat, no doubt. But then there's this disruption happens, like, the PLEO, the persistent low Earth orbit capabilities, the commercialization, decisions that were made 10 years ago about NASA and others now, boom, in 2019, just grow like Jack and the Beanstalk. And now all these assumptions you made prior to that, are they awkward? Are they off? And I will tell you they are. Do you need to be, ready for a bad day? And I mean, that's our nature, and that's how we got to be. But if you don't embrace the optimization of things like space, provide, you're going to be sub-optimized, and you're going to end up with solutions that are not ideal based on what the threat proposes. And space is a great example of it. Great space summit Secretary of the Navy had recently, but I will tell you, my summation from that is, no space, no chance, right? We need space. And taking full advantage of it and being open to things that maybe you weren't initially, again, like I said, assumptions every 90 days, I think is so important as we look forward. And it's happening, the technology side is happening. Software-defined radios. What the hell does that mean? Well, I know what it means now. And there are capabilities that we're able to do kind of near real time in software-defined ways to, again, not to keep pointing at Doug, but the things that they're doing that we need to be embraced fully. So there are opportunities out there. I think we just can't put blinders on and hold ourselves back. There's certainly risk with technology. There always is. But I sense that, boy, there's a lot of momentum going on. And it starts with industry. It starts with the commercial arm of it all that we got to be fully abreast of. Thanks.
Admiral Gautier, question for you that relates to this conversation of joint connections and interdependencies, and also sort of first principles from your perspective, right? The Coast Guard has to integrate its command and control with the interagency, with 2 departments, with a joint force, with partners and allies around the globe. How do you think about that joint integration piece of successful command and control for a widely distributed force?
So I think we start with meeting what the operational use case is for the U.S. Coast Guard. So it's complicated because when you think of what we do, it's things like the Coast Guard Cutter Polar Star that's just returning from Antarctica from Operation Deep Freeze. It's the Coast Guard Cutter Healy that reached the North Pole last summer, and that's going to circumnavigate, do a continental circumnavigation here coming up. It's when we operate in the greater presence that we have in the Indo-Pacific under 7th Fleet tack on. It's having a Coast Guard Cutter Spencer operating in the Gulf of Guinea doing illegal fishing operations with allies and partners under NAVAF. But then it is close ashore to the United States working for a Coast Guard sector. And so we start fundamentally with the same premise that we're hearing here. We need to have the right architecture, we need to have the right foundational infrastructure, the right networks, and the right tools, both in conjunction with the interoperability with naval forces, but then also through things like the Minotaur system, which is a tactical system that we use, but also DHS CBP uses as well. Being connected in that fashion so we get the operational commander the right information at the right time with speed for the decision advantage there.
Thank you. And we have a question from the floor, please.
Good morning, distinguished panel. Thank you for your time this morning. I'm Marshall Grant. I work in the Coast Guard's Office of Emergency Management and Disaster Response, so under 5R, and we're always busy. I want to use your analogy, Admiral. Just like the Coast Guard is an everything bagel, we're pretty spread thin. A bulk of our major cutter fleet is deployed to the south in support of Operation Vigilant Sentry and the southwest border, among all the other mission sets and demands that we have across the world. With such a highly distributed workforce, how does the Maritime Services continue to employ high mission success and performance while also focusing on retaining and retention and recruitment of our workforce?
Admiral, would you like to take first swing at that?
Yeah,
But I
well,
think this
from
applies-
Macosti, thanks very much for that question. It's a theme here at Sea Air Space. All this great technology and capability that we need to step into, and we are, has to be underpinned by the best workforce on planet Earth, right? And we're all, as services, having our degrees of challenges in terms of recruiting and sometimes retention in order to make this all work. I would submit that not only are these capabilities necessary to advance war fighting, to succeed in the continuum, right? Because for the Coast Guard, it's predominantly competing. In that continuum, our workforce demands these tools. So if we can provide them with these sophisticated capabilities for the first quarter of the 21st century moving forward, then I think that will be satisfactory, will help them be empowered to be successful, will help with the recruiting and retention moving forward.
Please, General Glavy, jump in.
So from a Marine Corps perspective, good news and bad news that's going to get better. So the good news is retention. Wow. I don't know if the Commandant saw this coming, but 103% of all our retention goals, and actually they become the floor, and we're going to continue. We made that the first week of March that we didn't do the last week of July of 22. So Marines are excited. They're excited about this. They're excited about these discussions that we're having. They're excited about the experimentation, that innovation that is going on right now. They're excited about getting out and about in the AOR without a doubt. So there's a lot of positive momentum as we do things like mature the force. Certainly some of it out of necessity, but again, we got to take full advantage of the opportunity presented. Recruiting is a challenge, right? It's a complicated discussion right now as we look around our nation. But right, we're not going to cry in our beer over it. Marine Corps has a way of doing this, right? If you want the best, you have to send the best, and that's what we do. The very best off the top of the Marine Corps goes out and makes Marines, whether it's recruiting in the Four Corners, 1,400 different sites, or it's making Marines down at San Diego and Parris Island, right? That's how we do it. And I like our odds. Again, it's tough. It's going to be challenging, really hard to make the goals here in 23 for so many reasons. But again, these Marines give them a mission and stand back.
Admiral Swalt, do you have any comment on sort of the challenge or opportunities in preparing for the future workforce that's going to need to be able to operate these systems capabilities and this approach to warfighting?
Sure. It's kind of like I talked about before, underpinning everything we're doing is, 11,000 plus, scientists, engineers, et cetera, et cetera. We're in a competition with companies that, where you can bring your dog to work and they feed you, all these different, that's who we have Apple literally moving into northern San Diego County. So that's who we have to compete with. And so we make a very big effort to work on our culture. We want to make sure that, for people that are coming out of college and know how to do things like software and stuff like that, that we are the place where they choose to come to work. And it comes down to our mission. Our mission, you can either come and write software that's going to go help, distributed maritime ops, or go sell ads somewhere, right? That's our value proposition. We work really hard on that. Now we have a whole effort, we call it mission mindset, and it's starting to pay off. We just had we've been locked in a battle with the Naval Reserve Force for a few years on terms of who has the highest employee engagement scores in the Federal Employee Viewpoint, and we are number one. So it's something you have to work on every day. Underpinning all of it is treating each individual with dignity and respect, and making sure that it's a place where people cannot wait to come to work in the morning. They're given an opportunity to work on stuff that's incredibly meaningful and contribute mightily from day one. So that's our approach.
Thank you all for your perspective. I think our workforce needs the best tools to succeed. That's how we win. So thank you very much.
And thank you very much. And we have somebody right behind you ready to ask the next question.
Admiral John Lawrence, U.S. Coast Guard, retired. Dr. Lawrence, nice to meet you.
Great to see you.
So Coast Guard's representing today. This is not a softball question, unfortunately. You mentioned Minotaur. And Minotaur really is a legacy mission system architecture that stifles innovation in its underlying subsystems, radars, other sensors, other data within the aircraft architecture, not necessarily on the network. So back to architecture. I think it's important, and in C2, everything moves so fast, right? The camera systems, all the EOIR OEMs, electronic warfare OEMs, radar OEMs are all developing as fast as they can updated capabilities. They're pushing the boundaries of the physics with their own processing. But if you layer in basically an architecture that requires two systems to be developed every time you want to add a capability, it just gets too hard. And the OEMs don't want to engage that process. You know, they don't want to be subservient to a mission system architecture. And I had hoped we had gotten away from that with CGC2. We didn't. We didn't. But I think what really would help are some national architectural standards for how onboard C2 systems interface with subsystems that allow those to be open architectures to innovate. So a radar has to send you a track message to your C2 system. Might have to send other data. You want that radar OEM to be able to innovate everything they can do to get a higher fidelity track message to you. Okay? If you assume that responsibility with a second party, they're going to stop innovating.
Thank you.
That's my
Appreciate
only
that.
comment.
Thank you. I saw a couple of heads nodding and shaking at that, so I think there are several points of view. But let me start with you, Dr. Karim, in terms of that sort of some of the trade space between legacy and transformation, of the efficiencies of pursuing multiple systems at once. What kind of perspective do you have to offer on that?
Sure, I couldn't agree more with the comments about open architecture and standards-based solutions. I think that's the future. I think the good news is we're starting to see that adoption. I think many of the folks on stage and out there are familiar with the Open Mission System Standard, OMS, OCS compliance systems, and systems that use the UCI messaging format. I think we're going to start to move away from that, call it a hypervisor model, where you need to integrate disparate proprietary systems, and you're moving more toward both and I'll say the word open is used and misused. We need to be capital O, open, and that's both in the bus that might exist on board a platform, and it extends all the way into the box. For example, in our multifunction processors, we provide those with software development kits, so third parties can develop waveforms, third parties can develop applications on our systems. That's where we're headed, I think, with capital O, open, and then the standards are there. We need to adhere to them and not wander off.
Admiral Small, how do you think about these
Where to
issues?
begin? So without talking to the specific application that you described, I mean, that is a big part of the challenge, is how do you take a system that was, architected to, forgive me for geeking, but, a full stack solution, right? I want to bring all my connections, maybe a new, network interface, all the compute and the application display, everything, and here's your capability. And what we're trying to do is go to a place where, hey, we'll provide all that stuff, we just want the software. So when I talk at industry days and other things like that to people, well, hey, we just want your software. We really just want the software. And what comes behind that is an architecture that abstracts everything away from that software. That's the world we're trying to bring to bear. So for whether it's that application or other ones, sometimes you have to re-architect them. We have a whole, as part of the architecture, two of the pieces of that are the infrastructure and then the data fabric. So abstract the data from the application and then provide the infrastructure where software is developed as containerized applications in a continuous delivery pipeline over the air to a digital platform. That is the way to move with the speed to be able to update applications like you just described. And then, on the standards piece, we have a lot of standards. Our thing is just pick one, and we can also figure out tools to, whether it's translating data from one standard to another when you need to. We know how to do that stuff too, and that's something that commercial industry does well as well. So.
Thank you for the answer. Since I threw a name out there, I just want to say that it's the architecture and not
Yes.
the system.
Yep.
Correct.
Admiral Gauthier, did you
I
want
think
to?
there was also something inherent in that question that was obsolescence of sensors as well. Because we talked about EOIR radar and so on and so forth. That is yet another problem that we have to deal with. And so one thing that's been intriguing for the Coast Guard is to, like others, observe what's happening with Task Force 59 and some of the lessons that's coming out of that, where you purchase services, right? You don't buy stuff and integrate it. You purchase state-of-the-art services. You see what works, what doesn't. You connect it, you can upgrade, and so on. That's why the Coast Guard has taken some of those lessons, and we now have unmanned surface vessels that are operating in areas of high volumes of illicit traffic in the Florida Straits, using sail drones there, and then the same thing off of San Diego on the Mexican-Californian border, and I think we'll expect to be doing more of that.
Thank you. We have another question at the microphone.
Let's see. Good morning. I'm J.D. Wilson with KPMG. As we realize JADC2, I think that the information sharing and across all the domains is obviously fundamental. And this means doing it across services, but also in the functional. We have to have ground fires work with the aviation, have to have the naval fires work with the logistics, et cetera. My question is, how well do we see this moving, and how do we accelerate it in your view, and how can industry help you move this forward to get the data sources to align and work together?
All these sound like Doug Small questions. So, but I'll tell you, they are doing that, and it's probably repeating myself, but I think the software is the key to all this. So the idea of J to K message translation was a big boom for the Marine Corps. Taking Link 16 messages, putting them FATIDs, taking airborne reconnaissance or airborne C2 and turning it into a ground fire mission at machine speed. Like, we couldn't, we broke our arms patting ourselves on the back. That's just a start to it's possible. It really is. As soon as you understand, again, some of the software challenges, and they're not insignificant, right? So Doug makes it sound easy. They're not insignificant, but that's where we got to go. We can't keep buying black boxes that do a single thing. They got to be software defined, and we got to be able to interact to do what we got to do based on whatever waveform or type of message that we got to translate into some other type of message that has to be near real time, to his point. Anyway, I'll just kind of leave it at that. There's a lot going on here, even in the innovation experimentation phase from a Marine Corps. How do you take that exquisite F-35 capability, and how do you turn it into a fire mission, a long-range fire mission, et cetera? So a lot going on here, and I think there's positive momentum. Not easy, not for a second, but I think it's doable.
Thank you. There are quite a few questions, but if anyone wanted to jump in, Admiral Spall, did you want to contribute?
I would just say that it gets to that data centricity is really the key, and where we're locked in and don't get the data, we have means of getting it out. I mean, the J to K is a great example of that, but it really comes down to data centricity.
Great.
And we've been talking about command and control, but I think we're thrilled by the opportunities that are presented by the fusion of data from from databases that we have. Some are pretty old and antiquated, but with the new ways of architecting and managing and fusing data for decision makers, that's pretty exciting. We've created an Office of Data and Analytics in the Coast Guard, and with this system called Surveyor and some other tech stacks, we hope to be able to use a lot of the data that we have better for decision makers in the Coast Guard.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you
for your
very
question. I appreciate that. And we'll go right to the next question as well. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. Appreciate all of your time this morning, panel. My name is Matt Chigas. I'm from Data Miner, And my question is in regard to sensing and innovation, particularly for you, General Glavy, but if we have time, I'd love to hear from the whole panel. What do you feel is the place for unclassified, publicly available information within the decision-making context of DMO and Loki, particularly as was just mentioned, as decision-making gets pushed further and further down the chain, and with regard to contested environments and perhaps the lack of communication with higher echelons? Thank you.
No doubt. So a big chunk of our world is taking full advantage of public available information. Senior leaders like to comment on, are students of the game. They're looking at this at a strategic level. Our intelligence mechanisms are awesome, and they're eye-watering, and they don't probably tell the whole story, especially the near real-time story. A visit of the extent that President Putin and President Xi had, right? There's a lot of real-time understanding of what happened there, and what do we need to do in the Pacific, right? What does the Marine Corps need to do with respect to various exercises, et cetera? Anyway, it's all tied together, and if we discount what PAI provides us, boy, we're just going to lose a march or two. So we're big fans. Putting it down into our MIGs, our MEF information groups, so now the MEF commander can have the same capability to fuse, correlate that publicly available information, generate outcomes. You need to know that PAI is, until it turns into OSINT, not targetable, right? But it is situational awareness that fills your brain with certainly ideas. And then there's always an intelligence polishing required to make sure we're legal, lawful, ethical in everything we do. So it all fits together though, and without it, I think we're slow, latent, and lethargic.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Before I take the next question, I do want to return to one issue that you raised, General Gautier, that I think is important for everybody, and that is the partners and allies piece to this. As we think about where we're going to fight, how we're going to fight, with whom we're going to fight, getting that part of it right as part of our national strategy, as part of our national defense strategy. So let me ask the questions. I'm actually going to start with Dr. Karim, but I want to welcome other perspectives too on what do we need to do, and what do we need our partners and allies to do in order to make it possible for widely distributed combined operations to have integrated command and control. So what do we need to do from day one today going forward to make sure that we can actually build command and control that includes and takes full advantage of partners and allies for distributed maritime operations? Dr. Karim.
Well, sure. I think it's no mystery that there's a changing global security environment. We see our allies and partners shifting their defense posture. We see the emergence of the AUKUS agreement. I think our partners and allies will be facing the same individual country challenges that we have, how to best modernize and integrate their weapon systems, not just individually in a sovereign capability, but also inside coalitions, inside regional coalitions, and with our own armed forces. I think the toolbox is the same, right? What's the mix of line of sight, beyond line of sight capabilities that allow you to stitch that digital battle network together, going back to what General Glavy mentioned, how do you bring in those exquisite F-35 capabilities that's really one of the leading weapon systems that's being exported. It's the same toolbox. The MADL to Link 16 translator that allows Marines to take long-range shots based on F-35 sensor data, that's something that's going to be important in the European security theater as well. So I think there's a warfighting component and the function of command and control that is a job for the uniformed warfighter, but the same connectivity toolbox is essential, and we're working with our partners and allies to deliver the same capabilities that are so important to our U.S. warfighters as well.
Admiral Gautier, would you like to?
Yeah, I think so. That's the sort of space that we have to operate in every single day. I mean, certainly Five Eyes Partners is a little bit easier than some of the other communities that we work with. And for us, it might be putting a Coast Guard liaison officer on a partner vessel with a radio or something like that, as sort of rudimentary as that might be, in order to try to gain that interoperability. But it is a challenge, and we need to continue to work closely with them.
Next question, please.
Hello, gentlemen. This is Michaela Easley with Defense Scoop. Something that the other services have discussed as they develop their JADC2 capabilities is the problem of data and creating so much data as we connect everything. How are you all addressing this data management piece within the Navy, each of the services, and industry as well, too, as you develop Project Overmatch?
Since you said the magic overmatch word, I'll start with you, Admiral Small.
I didn't get the gist of the question. Was with data?
Would you?
It was data management and how you are tackling the data management piece of Project Overmatch.
Data management. So there's multiple use cases for the use of the data. I won't cover all of them, but I'll just kind of at an architectural level, I'd say it starts with just using the best of commercially available data architecture tools arranged in a you call it a fabric, but it's the same sort of things, whether it's databases, database replication and syncing, all those sorts of capabilities. Start incrementally, start on one platform, then platform to platform, then echelon to echelon, and build that out, but in a data fabric where the data is abstracted from the application. I don't know if that gets at it, but.
Can I ask you how the Marine Corps is thinking about data management for this widely distributed force that is in a contested environment and is going to be trying to communicate for missions that you haven't been executing here for the last couple of decades? How do you think about data management as a key component of distributed maritime operations, low-key EAVO?
So if we're going to get into this business of targeting and targeting at scale, data's going to be critical, and it's going to be a lot of it. But it's got to be the right kind, I think, to Admiral Small's point. It's got to be thin enough to execute in various locations. So, all the graphic user interfaces, all that bulky stuff has to be inherent, and then all we need is that data later, right? Whatever it may be, whatever scenario you want to decide, and it's got to move on bandwidth that may be thin, maybe not, but that has to be a way that we think about how we use our data. Because if we're going to target and execute those warfighting functions, we need that thin data layer in order to do it right.
It's really a question for our moment. The Coast Guard's on the same journey, especially as we look at integrating ever more sensors that need PED behind it in order to make those unmanned systems and other sensors meaningful to target for boardings or what have you. So I just wanted to take the opportunity right here, Day 2 Sierra Space, to announce the U.S. Coast Guard Unmanned Systems Strategic Plan that outlines how we intend on moving UXSs into the Coast Guard portfolio, do counter UAS, and then also establish standards for legitimate uses of UXS in the maritime environment.
Great, thanks.
I just wanted to follow up on the data thing too, especially as a part of the JADC2 question. That data fabric is being worked in conjunction with the CDAO and our joint service partners and drawing mission threads through that whole thing. So just want to make sure that we're working across on all aspects of the architecture.
Great, thank you. We're getting near the end of our time. We'll take one more question, and please step right up.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen, for giving me the opportunity to ask a question. Lieutenant Commander David Baxter. When we think about distributed maritime operation, it's a capability. Our acquisition process is optimized towards producing hardware. I think that's something that we recognize. Given the additional flexibility we've been given with contracting, do we still have another problem to solve in terms of iterating quickly? You talked about a 90-day major decision, major assumption challenge, and we have a kind of a 2-year sort of POM requirements framework. Is there something that we need to do differently to maybe structurally change the way that we are acquiring capabilities, or are we in a good place? And maybe that's a good question both for our uniformed and our industry panelists.
I'm happy to jump in and say we have all the authorities we need to be able to move at speed and scale to deliver what it is that we need to deliver, at least in this conversation. Now, if it's a new design for a new ship or something, that's not what we're talking about here. But when it comes to software-defined things and things like that, we have all the authorities we need to move at speed and scale within the structure that we have, which includes two-year POM cycle, contracting. You know, we talk about contracting a lot. There are so many different tools out there for us to be able to work with industries of all types that fit the bill. It's just a matter of, you know, finding the right one. But I don't think we need to do it. It may not be a very popular opinion, but I don't know that we need to do anything different. We just need leadership.
Excellent. Thanks.
I did. I think I said the same thing when I was on the other side of the line, that you know, the authorities are there. There's generally scope. There's generally ceiling. Some of it is, I think, more philosophically, a willingness to allow the technology and operating concept to emerge in parallel, similar to what General Glavy and Admiral Small brought up earlier, taking some appropriate bites and not being scared to field an 80% solution. It's okay to not be perfect in some of these initial articles that we put out there. And I think you're starting to see that work its way into the acquisition process and acquisition mindset.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm sorry to report that we have reached the end of the time allotted for this panel. A couple of quick thank yous. One to the crew that's working here so that you can see us and hear us. Appreciate that. And the folks that organized this panel and supported this panel. Thank you all for being here in this room, and I ask you to join me with one additional thank you to our panelists. Thanks for joining us today.